Hi, it's Susan Isley. Welcome to today's episode of I Travel Nurse TV. Nice to see ya. Today's episode is travel nursing in Alaska. Alaska has always been an interesting spot that a lot of travel nurses want to go to, but for whatever reason they're a little hesitant. Well, I've actually worked in a few cities in Alaska, so I'm going to give you my experience on an overview. Now, one of the reasons why I didn't take a travel contract in Alaska initially is because, every time we look at going to a certain place, we look at the cost of what it would take to get there. And you start looking at the board fees for the Alaska State Board of Nursing. Well, they're rather high. They're about like $300, and that's on top of all the garbage fees, like the verification of licenses through nurses and all the fingerprints and so forth, all the junk fees, So when you look at that and have to spend all this kind of money to go, to Alaska just to get a license, that sort of deters from that. But you know what? Some companies, like one company I worked through Meridian Medical Staffing, actually upfronted the cost of my license, my Alaska license, temporary and permanent license, and so that made it more advantageous or made me want to go there quicker. So, they had a contract up in Bethel, Alaska, and were willing to upfront the fees, but just know that you're probably not going to find that through a lot of the other companies. You're going to have to pay for it for yourself. But generally speaking, this is travel nursing in Alaska. Now, Alaska in history, it is based upon, of course, the native people of Alaska. You think the Eskimos. Well, actually, the Eskimos are actually in the northern part of Alaska, but there's many tribes in the native population of Alaska. And when you go up there, you'll learn about it. They'll actually teach you about it in orientation. So what happened many, many years ago is that, our U.S. government came in and, did some horrible things to the native people of Alaska. And what eventually happened is that there were some settlement agreements with the Alaska Native people and our U.S. government, and they constructed it into like a business. So there are different tribes and they're run by corporations. And so each corporation, each tribal corporation governs the healthcare of a certain region for Alaska. So you might go to Bethel, Alaska, and there'll be one tribe that's governing it. You go to Sitka, there's another one. You go up to Barrow, there's another one. Anchorage is another one, and so forth. But that is one thing that you're going to learn about or experience when you go up there. Now, because of how things are set up, it will just all depend on whether or not you go through a traditional travel company or what you might want to take advantage of, and that is something that they call TDY. It's like a military term, like temporary duty assignment, TDY. So either you can go up to Alaska via a traditional travel company if they have a contract, or you can apply with a hospital and be a staff member of the hospital, but still work under the travel nurse type of umbrella. And so that is what TDY is called. So let me give you an example. The hospital in Bethel, now I will not be able to pronounce the name of the tribe because it's a long name. It's like Yukon Kuskokwim Health Corporation, or they usually just call it YK Hospital in Bethel. Well, that is the tribal group that's governing that region. So it's YK Hospital. For example, they have a program called TDY, in which so you apply online as a staff member, you sign up for the position TDY, like it'll come up, it'll say registered nurse for med surge or for ER, it'll say TDY. So look for that TDY. So you apply, and then they will either accept you as in the TDY position. And then what happens from that point is you communicate directly with the hospital, or that they might call you, you might call them, you might call up there and say, hey, do you have a need? I'll come up, or I can come up anytime, or I'm finishing this contract on this day. If you have a need, call me, I can come up. The manager might call you directly. Usually they're like 13-week assignments, but I have heard of assignments being as long as 6 months, and I've heard them being as short as just even a few weeks. It would just depend on the need. Now, when I worked up in Bethel, Alaska at the YK Hospital, There was a nurse that was actually coming over. She was a United States nurse, but her husband and her lived in Ireland, and she would come over and work in the United States for about every 6 months and then go back. Now, one of the nice things about working through the hospital, and especially working this TDY capacity, is that they will actually pay for your airfare. So like they paid for her airfare coming over from Ireland. So if you're in the what they call the lower 48 states, which would be like California and every place else, on through Florida, the lower 48, they will pay for your airfare up there, which is very, very good. And this is a very, very big point I want to make. The hospitals will pay for your airfare up there, but not necessarily all travel companies will pay for your airfare up there. And I will tell you that getting up to Alaska can be hella expensive, especially if it's done in the last minute. Like, for example, when I first went up to Bethel, Alaska, I was flying out of LA, and Meridian Medical Staffing actually upfronted the cost, but it was about $1,000 to fly up to Bethel, Alaska, because I had to go from LA, and I think I went up through Seattle, through Anchorage, and then to rural Alaska. It's expensive to get there. So working TDY, they will pay for your airfare up and back. Now, apparently it's a state law in Alaska that if somebody gets you up there, they can't just leave you up there. They have to fly you back. That's the word on the street. I'm still waiting to see the law for that, but apparently that exists. It was actually my ER charge nurse named Dan told me about that Alaska state law. But now another thing, if you want to go through a regular travel company, now, when it comes to airfare, this is so important. Like I said, some companies will pay for you to fly up there in advance and then fly you back. It's within your contract. Other companies make you upfront the fees, and you know what? They shouldn't do that, because it's my understanding this actually comes from Meridian Medical Staffing. They told me this, my recruiter did, even though I don't care for Meridian Medical Staffing at this point. But, at the time, they said that they get reimbursed by the hospital for the cost of the airfare. So if they're not upfronting your airfare, you have to ask why they're not upfronting your airfare. Like I said, that's a huge chunk of money. Okay, so now when you get up to Alaska, and if you get into these rural parts of Alaska, such as Bethel, such as Nome, such as Barrow, Alaska, and even through, some of the other places, you're going to run into what they call hospital-provided housing. Meaning that even if you go through a regular travel company, they're not going to be doing the housing for you. And that is because housing is so limited up in these rural parts of Alaska, because you'll be working in like critical access hospitals if you go to those places. So the hospital provides you housing. Many times they will provide you taxi vouchers. I mean, there's so many taxis like in Bethel and up in Barrow. I mean, it's like sometimes I think there's more taxis there than there are people that actually live there. But taxis are very, very common. Everybody takes a taxi in Alaska. That is not unusual. Very few people have cars up there. Usually the only people that do are those people that have gone up there, signed a long-term contract for a couple years, and have relocation expenses provided to them, and then maybe had their car shipped up on the barge. Okay, so now just keep in mind, taxis, that's not uncommon. The hospital will give you taxi vouchers because it's usually about a $5 ride. And some people, when they get up there, they walk. But you know what? There's so many wild animals out there, and then if you go up there in the middle of winter, then you have to deal with all the ice and the snow. You would have to get, cleats for your shoes, to be able to just walk down the street. So I don't recommend personally just walking around Alaska unless you're like really good with a gun or really good at catching wild animals, that type of thing. But just know if you go up there, there's plenty of taxis, and you will get taxi vouchers to go to and from work. Now, outside of work, you're going to have to pay for your own taxi fares. Okay, so now food prices in Alaska, they're through the roof. Food prices can cost you anywhere from 2.5 to 3 times or more of what you would spend in the lower 48 states. So if you are a person that's got a lot of bills and you're really pushed tight in a budget in the lower 48 states, and you think that if you make $2 an hour or $3 an hour going up to Alaska, you know, you might end up not getting what you thought you might get in the first place as far as any kind of, you know, financial incentive. You will have to look at your own individual picture like that, because I'm telling you, these food prices are outrageous. I can go down to the local grocery store here in California and spend $50. The same food that I would buy up in, say, Bethel, Alaska might cost me $150. And just keep in mind, because that is due to location. It's, you know, hard to get food up there. They have to ship everything up there, and air freight cost and extra fees to ship food up there is quite high. So you do pay for it in the back end. Okay, so here, Coke Zero. Coke Zero, you might be able to get it for $5 or $6 if it's not on sale in the lower 48 states. It can cost you $12, $13, $14, maybe even $15 for a 12-pack of Coke Zero up in Alaska. So like I said, 2 to 3.5 times the amount of money for food. So factor that in. You know, I do not cook a lot, but my grocery bill about every week and a half was about $300, and that's practically for hardly any food. And I ate out a lot. There's plenty of restaurants. If you're a person that doesn't want to deal with that, there's plenty of restaurants, and there's plenty of restaurants that will actually even deliver to the hospital. I mean, when I worked in Bethel, Alaska, you know, it's like I'm not cooking, I'm not dealing with that kind of stuff. So I literally ordered Chinese food every day. But that Chinese food that I ordered would cost me like $20 to $25 every single day. But, you know, it was just something that I decided I was going to do. Okay, housing. Housing in these rural parts of Alaska. Hospital provided housing. A lot of times you have a roommate. You may have 2, 3, or 4 roommates depending on the situation. Sometimes you'll be put in little huts. Other times you may be put into big houses in which they might have 4 bedrooms. There's no other housing arrangements unless you want to attempt to find your own housing yourself. Now, some of these places that, you know, there's hotels, you know, you could stay at, but it could cost you way over $100 a night just to stay in a hotel. I know I had some discord with some roommates when I was working in Bethel, Alaska, and I thought about going and getting a hotel, but it was going to cost me $125 a night to do so. But just know, hotels are, you know, if you have a roommate problem, they're few and far between as far as living arrangements. So you're going to have to just try to learn, see if you can finagle living with a roommate for the time that you're up there. And, you know, people come in and out of Alaska so frequently, it's likely there might even be a period of time that you don't have a roommate at all. Okay, so that is an overview of Alaska. Now, those are rural parts of Alaska. Now, if you get into Anchorage, Anchorage is a city very much like cities in the lower 48 states, and there are more living options, there's more hotel options, more cost-effective housing. There's regular grocery stores such as Walmart, Walmart is up there, and then other regular grocery stores that would have more effective, cost-effective food prices. So think of Anchorage as being like a city in the lower 48 states, perhaps a teeny bit higher, 10 to 15% higher, but you've got the resources like Starbucks, Walmart, a shopping mall, and so forth. But you get into the rural parts of Alaska, then you have to deal with hospital provided housing and very expensive food prices. But I'll tell you, if you can get into rural Alaska, I think it's going to be an experience that you never forget. Anyway, that's today's episode of iTravel Nurse TV overview of working in Alaska. I hope you take a travel assignment up there. I think you're going to love it. You'll love the experience. I'll see you next time.